Today, we're doing something a little different. We're going to take an ancient text, the ninth chapter of Luke, and treat it like a modern case study. Think of it as a leadership boot camp. We're on the hunt for timeless lessons about communication, conflict, and, commitment, stuff we can actually use in our own lives. So, you might be asking yourself, what can a 2,000-year-old story really teach us about navigating conflict today? And that's a fair question. But here's the thing. When it comes to the human dynamics of leadership and, group conflict, it turns out things haven't changed all that much. So let's dive in and see what we can find. All right, so every boot camp starts with a mission briefing, right? First, we're going to look at the instructions given to the trainees. Then, I'm going to introduce a really powerful communication tool we'll be using to break down how they performed throughout this whole story. So the leader, Jesus, gets his 12 closest followers together. He gives them their mission. Go out, proclaim the kingdom, and heal the sick. Simple enough. But then he throws in this massive curveball, a really tough constraint. You can't take anything with you. No money, no extra clothes, nothing. This is huge. It immediately puts them in this position of total reliance and forces them to really, truly engage with the communities they enter. It's basically a field test right from the get-go. Okay, so to really understand the interactions that are about to happen, we're going to use a specific lens. It's called nonviolent communication, or NVC for short. And don't let the name fool you. This isn't about being passive or a doormat. It's actually a super powerful framework for figuring out what's really going on underneath all the words, by focusing on the core human needs that are driving all of our feelings and our actions. NVC breaks down into 4 really simple but kind of profound steps. First step is observation. You just state what you see. No judgment, just the facts. Then comes feeling. You identify the emotion that's coming up for you. Step 3 is the big one, need. You figure out the universal human need that's behind that feeling, a need for respect or safety or belonging. And last, you make a request, something clear, positive, and actually doable. This little framework, it's going to be the key to unlocking this whole story. All right, now it's time for the trainees' first major field test. And this one is high stakes. We're talking a massive crowd, a really fundamental human need, hunger, and pretty much zero resources to deal with it. So, try to picture this. The story says there were 5,000 men. Now, that number doesn't even count the women and children who were there too. So we're talking about a crowd the size of a small town. And they're all out in the middle of nowhere as the sun starts to go down. The scale of the need here is just immense. And this is where things get really interesting, because you see this total clash of perspectives. The disciples, they look at what they have, like 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, and they make a totally logical request based on scarcity. They say, hey, let's just send the crowd away so they can find their own food. It's basically delegate the problem. But Jesus just completely reframes the whole thing. He looks at them and says, no. You give them something to eat. He's not just giving an order, he's challenging their entire mindset about what's possible. And what happens? Well, the result is pretty incredible. After everyone has eaten their fill, the disciples go and collect the leftovers, and they fill up 12 baskets. This just perfectly shows what happens when you shift from that scarcity mindset to one where you address needs directly and creatively. I mean, there wasn't just enough food, there was an abundance. It's no coincidence there were 12 baskets, one for each of the trainees who thought it was impossible just a little while earlier. Okay, so after that intense field test, the boot camp kind of shifts gears. It moves inward to this moment of, profound clarity. It's like a peak experience designed to really hammer home what the mission is all about. So Jesus pulls his disciples aside and asks, hey, what's the word on the street? Who do people say that I am? And they give him all the popular theories. But then he just cuts right through all that noise and makes it personal. He looks at them and asks, but what about you? Who do you say I am? See, he's not looking for gossip. He's demanding their own personal conviction. This is that pivot point where every trainee has to decide for themselves what they actually believe. And right after this, things get even more intense. Jesus takes his inner circle, Peter, John, and James, up on a mountain. And as he's praying, something extraordinary starts to happen. The text says the very appearance of his face begins to change. You can just feel the whole atmosphere shifting from just a quiet moment to a full-blown revelation. And the description is just so vivid. His clothes don't just turn white, they become as bright as a flash of lightning. I mean, dazzling. Then, 2 of the most legendary figures from their entire history, Moses and Elijah, just appear and start talking with him. For the disciples watching this whole thing unfold, it must have been absolutely mind-blowing and probably pretty terrifying too. And then you get the climax of this whole peak experience. Peter, who's just kind of battling because he has no idea what to say, gets cut off. A voice comes out of a cloud and delivers this ultimate, crystal clear endorsement and command. All those questions about who Jesus is, they're just swept away, replaced by one simple, powerful instruction. Listen to him. This is that moment of absolute, undeniable clarity for the mission. So after witnessing a miracle of abundance and then this incredible mountaintop revelation, you'd think the trainees would be operating on a whole new level, right? Yeah, you'd be wrong. Because their communication skills are about to be put to the test and, spoiler alert, they fail spectacularly. So here's the setup. They're heading to Jerusalem and they send a couple of guys ahead to a Samaritan village to get things ready for them. But there's this long-standing bad blood between Jews and Samaritans, and the villagers basically say no thanks. They reject them outright. Okay, let's bring back that NBC framework we talked about. The observation is simple. They did not welcome us. The implied feeling? Well, that's got to be anger, maybe some indignation. And what's the universal need behind that anger? It's the need for respect, for acceptance, for being seen. But here's the kicker. Look at their request. Because they don't know how to articulate their need, they jump straight to a violent, destructive strategy. They ask, Lord, you want us to call down fire from heaven and destroy them? I mean, wow. It's just a textbook example of how unmet needs, when we don't understand them, can spiral into some really destructive impulses. And believe me, this was not a one-off thing. Right around the same time, they completely failed to help a child who's in desperate need. Then, they get caught up in this petty, ego-driven argument about which one of them is the greatest. And to top it off, they try to shut down some guy who's out there doing good work just because he's not part of their club. You see the pattern here, right? It's all rooted in fear, ego, and just a total lack of understanding. And all of this brings us to the final challenge of this leadership bootcamp. After seeing all the miracles and all the failures, a few potential new recruits show up. And this is where the true, absolutely uncompromising cost of joining this mission is laid bare. The chapter closes out with this really quick, rapid-fire series of 3 different encounters. First, an enthusiastic guy volunteers, and Jesus basically warns him about how unstable and homeless his life is. Then, another guy offers what sounds like a totally reasonable excuse, I have to go bury my father. And Jesus gives him this shocking, almost harsh reply that puts the mission above everything. And finally, someone just wants to go say goodbye to his family, and the response is just as stark. The message couldn't be clearer. This path requires an absolute no turning back kind of commitment. And this final line just drives the point home with this really powerful metaphor. You know, if you've ever seen someone plowing a field, you know you have to keep your eyes fixed on a point way out in the distance to make a straight furrow. The second you look back, you're going to swerve off course. The boot camp ends right there, with this intense lesson on the need for radical, unwavering focus. So in the end, this ancient boot camp leaves us with a question that feels incredibly modern. When we feel rejected, when our ego gets bruised, when our need for security or acceptance gets trampled on, how do we choose to respond? Do we lash out with fear and anger, just like the disciples did? Or can we maybe learn to understand our own needs a little better and make more conscious, more life-affirming choices? It's a challenge that is just as real for us today as it was 2,000 years ago.